Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Turkey. The ruling party's regained its majority, so now the real work begins. Can the government turn around an economy struggling with rising inflation, slowing growth and a shrinking tourism sector? Also this week, the Indonesian forest fires. We look at the environmental cost of the traditional slash and burn farming that's already sent more than 140,000 people to hospital this year and affected millions more across Southeast Asia. And there's a massive economic cost too. $33 billion wiped from the Indonesian economy this year. How does the government offset that sort of loss? So last time we talked Turkey on Counting the Cost, it was all about uncertainty. The AK party had lost its parliamentary majority. Another election was set for 4 months later. Turkey was a bit rudderless, really. But now the turnaround. AK party has since won that election, a big win, where it regained its majority in parliament with 317 seats, enough to form a government on its own. But perhaps winning the vote was the easy part, because now it's about turning Turkey around and dealing with some big challenges. Ankara has, of course, resumed its war with the Kurdish separatists, the PKK, and suffered numerous ISIL attacks as well. That violence has alarmed Turks and foreign investors, surely part of the reason the electorate swung back towards a single-party government. And the economy's got its own problems too, and as we know, in the end, it's all about the economy. So let's start with the currency. The lira's tumbled more than 25% against the euro and the dollar this year, one of the worst performing emerging market currencies in the world, though it has bounced back almost 5% since the election. There is the current account deficit, which has now widened out to $45 billion in the year to July 2015. Essentially, Turkey is spending much more than it earns. The once booming economy that grew 9.2% in 2010, now forecast to grow only 3% for this year and 2.9% for the year after, and that's according to the IMF and the World Bank. And the vital tourism and export sectors have also shrunk. Tourism revenue is down in the first quarter of this year, and the export goal of $173 billion for 2015, very likely that will not be met. So Turkey needs something solid to reverse all these trends, and not surprisingly, President Erdogan believes he and his party are the right people for that.
The national will manifested itself on November the 1st in favor of stability. After the short-term developments, the national will decided that there is no way out other than choosing stability. They decided in favor of stability. I hope this outcome will be good for our people and our country.
Well, let's find out. Joining us from Ankara is Professor Murat Yulik, who's a former IMF economist now with the Istanbul Commerce University. You know, President Erdogan, I'm quoting him here, he says the people decided in favour of stability. Has he got a fair point there that with all this uncertainty there's been in Turkey, that we're now looking for some stability and that's what the AK party brings?
Yes, I think this is the general sentiment in Turkey that was reflected as the president, in the president's words. There are a number of reasons that observers, let's say, have cited why AK party has, led to a great majority and an unexpectedly high vote. And among them is the fact that people are really now looking for economic and political stability. So I guess that what he said would be supported by different observers in Turkey as well.
So what sort of economics, what sort of economic policies does the AK party bring to Turkey? What have they talked about in the lead up to this election? What are they promising to do with things like the falling currency, the deficit, all these sorts of issues?
Well, basically, one advantage that AK party, the governing party, had was they were in power for now almost 13 years or so. And as you know, previous to that period, Turkey has experienced a number of financial and economic crises, coupled with political instability and different economic problems like very high inflation and fiscal policy and current account deficits, etc. And during the last 13 years or so, there has been a success in terms of economic stability. For example, inflation went down. The growth was much more, let's say, much less volatile much more stable. And at the same time, although normally you would expect a governing party after 10 or 13 years to lose support from people, apparently, generally the people are favor of, let's say, the governing party because of the political stability and economic stability that came with them. Basically, what they said was, we are proposing these things to increase, for example, the minimum wage, which, by the way, will be borne by the private sector more than the public sector. Or we are going to increase the let's say, minimum pension payments to the lowest echelon of, let's say, the scale. When you add them up, about 7 or 8 billion US dollars is quite manageable because Turkey's fiscal situation, including in 2015, but also previously, is among the best in Europe. So it is quite manageable. And there is not a large concern about, whether there will be an inflationary consequence or a fiscal consequence of these promises.
Now, you talked about the minimum wage there, and I would like to focus a little bit more on the issue of unemployment. How bad is unemployment in Turkey? Because I always see that as the most important measure. You can talk about current account deficits, and you can talk about currencies, and you can talk about debt or anything, but really employment will always be the thing that is most important to the people of any country.
I think you are quite right. In terms of employment, we are between 9 and 10%. Compared to Europe, it is not very, very high because in Europe now, as you know, there are let's say, the countries like Germany, which are doing very well in terms of employment. I think they are about 6 to 7%, if I'm not wrong. But then you got, for example, Spain, which is about 20%. So when you look at Turkey, around 9 or 10% in Turkey is manageable. But of course, it is not what normally we would expect. We would expect in a high-growing country like Turkey, those unemployment rates to go down.
Do you think that Turkey's international partners will be happy seeing the AK party back in power? We come back to this issue of stability. Those partners may or may not agree with AK Party's policies on any number of things. But the fact that they're back in power, they might actually like that just because it means some stability for Turkey and its place in the world.
Well, again, of course, this is more about, a question to the economic partners of Turkey. But personally, when I look at the news in different international media, and when I talk to people, of course, now the world is very small, so you get, emails and WhatsApp messages from everywhere in the world, personally also. In general, I think the fact that there is a stability, let's say, gain from one single-party government, there is, I think, a good reception so far. People from Germany's Chancellor Merkel to President Obama, almost every leader in Europe, in the US, in Japan, etc., have congratulated, obviously. But then there is, of course, the Middle East now is quite, quite, let's say, adventurous. So there are a lot of political and diplomatic issues between countries, between almost every country in the world, centering around the situation in the Middle East. So in terms of politics, what leader really, congratulates by heart, or which leader not, I cannot know that. But on the official level and at the personal level, it looks like the financial environment, like the banks, etc., international banks, international investors, or political leaders, they are all apparently welcoming the situation.
Professor Murat Yuluk on the future of the Turkish economy this week. Professor, thank you for that.
Welcome.
In part two of the show this week, we're looking at what's been described as the world's worst environmental catastrophe. Now, that could refer to a lot of things, but we're talking about the forest fires in Indonesia. 100,000 fires this year alone, 40 million people affected, and across the region, 140,000 who've needed hospital treatment. It is really dire. The fires have pumped out more carbon dioxide over the last 3 weeks than Germany produces in an entire year. and surpass the United States too, which is the world's second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China. The Indonesian government has estimated the haze will cost it more than $33 billion this year alone. And what's worse is the majority of the fires were started deliberately to clear land for farming, things like palm oil. In fact, Indonesian police are now investigating some of the large palm oil companies for their role in causing the fires. And they're not alone. Paper companies have also been criticised because they clear large areas for commercial plantations. Ironically, some of those plantations are now burning as well. Step Varsen gained exclusive access to one such company in South Sumatra.
This is the epicenter of Indonesia's fire disaster. Thousands of hectares of acacia, used to make paper, are on fire. An inferno contributing heavily to the toxic haze affecting tens of millions of people in Indonesia and neighboring countries. Asia Pulp and Paper is one of the world's largest producers of paper and packing. The company's officials took Al Jazeera exclusively on a helicopter ride to their worst-hit plantations. A lack of visibility makes clear how efforts to control the fires are being hampered. The company says the blaze started outside its supplier plantations.
Roughly around 90% of the fires in our suppliers' concessions coming from outside. Yes, there are fires coming from inside as well. A lot of them that we have investigated so far are people coming into the conservation areas, hunters, gatherers, or people who just went past. I mean,
Isn't that an easy, it sounds so easy to me, blaming other people?
I'm not blaming other people. We have responsibility to make sure that the areas of our suppliers is actually protected.
This appears to have failed. The company blames extreme drought conditions because of the El Niño weather system and strong winds for causing the fires to spread rapidly. Supermarkets in nearby Singapore are boycotting products made by Asia Pulp and Paper, blaming the company for the fires, which are also affecting the city-state. 3 years ago, the company announced it would stop converting natural forest into plantations. Asia Pulp and Paper has been scrutinized for many years over its widespread deforestation. Now it's being criticized for its huge role contributing to this haze. Despite government promises to bring those involved to justice, this company has not been investigated. The government says it wants to focus on firefighting efforts before taking legal steps against anyone found responsible for starting the fires.
I think police investigate very much detail. We don't want to hurry to do this. We like to do it very steady here. In order,
people are worried they're going to get away with it, right? That they get off the hook.
I don't think so, but we will solve this problem. I promise you, because you see the impact of this is really huge. You know, 43 million people of Indonesia in that particular area affected by this haze. Yeah.
The minister says slash and burn practices, which involves burning down existing vegetation before planting new ones, will be banned. The government also says it will take back hundreds of thousands of hectares of converted peatland from plantation companies and restore it. And as the fires continue to burn, Asia Pulp and Paper says they can only be stopped when the rainy season starts in 3 to 4 weeks.
And just to highlight that this is a global problem, the French capital, Paris, has once again been hit with dangerous levels of pollution. There's talk that if things don't improve, then drastic measures may be needed to cut motor traffic. The latest alert comes less than a month before Paris hosts the COP21 UN conference on climate change. It's aiming for the most ambitious ever worldwide agreement to limit carbon emissions and reduce global warming. So we're going to look at the environmental and economic costs of this pollution, starting with Peter Holgram from the Centre for International Forestry Research. He's joining us by Skype from Jakarta. Peter, I find this whole Indonesia story quite fascinating because it is huge, and yet it almost seems to be going on in the background. There is acute other news happening elsewhere in the world, but we also have this massive, massive problem which has just become a part of the everyday news.
Well, I wouldn't say it's in the background here in Indonesia. It's been on the front page of the news for quite some time now, and it's really an issue that is growing by the day. It's affecting hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, and it's really a big deal here.
Of course, quite right. I was meaning more on an international scale, but maybe that is the issue. It's in Asia, it's localised, it's not making global headlines anymore, and yet it is so very serious.
Well, interestingly, when you read international media, you very often face the news about the emissions of greenhouse gases as one of the big news. That is correct, but it's not the first priority locally in these locations.
All right, take our viewers through how something like this happens on such a scale, because we see forest fires in, say, Australia or California. They happen every year. This is on a different sort of scale. Just explain it for us.
Yes, if you look at the area wouldn't be that much bigger than what you see in, as you say, Australia or sub-Saharan Africa. The difference here is that we have peatlands under fire, and those fires are much more persistent. They produce much more smoke and haze, and they last for much longer. So that's the main difference with these fires. The reason they're happening is because fire is a cost-effective tool for those practicing agriculture, whether it is for large-scale development of land or if it is small-scale clearings.
So what is it going to take, in your opinion, to actually get this under control, or something that resembles control?
It's clear that prevention is the key word. This is not a matter of putting out these fires once they've started. This is about prevention, and that prevention has to lead to a few different things. It has to lead to, of course, less use of fire in agriculture overall. It has to lead to less intensity of land use on peatlands for a variety of reasons, including the fire issues. And it needs, above all, to lead to better opportunities for the people that make their living off the land and of agriculture in these locations.
Well, you're clearly an expert who understands that. Do you feel, though, that those who make the decisions about what to do next, do they understand that long-term picture?
I think everybody is very much aware of the long-term prevention needs. The next level of interventions, I think, would be to look across sectors in a more clear way, because you will not solve this unless you look at both issues of conservation and forest management, as well as the agriculture and food sectors.
Peter Holgram from the Centre for International Forestry Research, thank you for your time. Now, also in Jakarta for us to talk more about the economic impact is Luca Tacconi. He's director of the Asia-Pacific Network for Environmental Governance. You know, the more I read about these Indonesian fires, Luca, the more it strikes me that no part of the economy will be spared. Is that fair to say? I know it's a lot about agriculture and the people and businesses which do business there, but I mean, everyone's getting hit.
Well, no, you're actually right that large parts of the economy have been affected. Including, for example, there have been reports of reduced oil production during the period of the heaviest haze, and a lot of, probably thousands of flights have been cancelled. And you know, the agricultural sector is certainly directly affected, but we know from science reports that over the long term that can the fires, the haze can result in reduced agricultural production, basically.
Yeah, and that must have a long-term effect here, because we think about the fires and putting them out and the acute problem that's at hand. But I mean, how long-term are we looking here?
Well, you see, the problem has been going on for decades, really, with the burning of forest and especially the burning in peatlands. I mean, the worst part of the fires has probably passed, hopefully has passed, but they will certainly come back when we go through another spell of drought, and this year is El Nino year, so we could actually be faced with more fires even in the new year. During the worst El Nino event, which was in 1997-98, we had fires throughout October, November, and then the worst part started in about February, March, that affected East Kalimantan. So we really need to watch and see what happens with the current El Nino phase.
Yeah, okay, so the El Nino is not something that can be controlled, obviously, but surely the Indonesian government has got to be doing some sort of future-proofing here and learning from what's happened in the past. You just said this has happened before, so has enough been done to make the necessary changes to limit the damage caused by El Nino and the resulting fires?
Well, look, this time I think there are good signs, because the government has, let's say, learned from the past. There is actually the good signs this time are that the political will appears to be there. The president has certainly shown his interest and is really driving some change. The question is whether they will actually manage then to implement some of the regulations, some of the things they're talking about. I think the government is seriously considering some change now because they have realized that the fires, the haze, is actually affecting the country to a significant extent. I mean, if we're talking about the impacts of the fires, we are really looking at billions of dollars of damage. The government is realizing the heavy cost that they faced by not addressing the problem. But it's not something that is going to be addressed in the short term because they really need to shift from basically fighting the fire to a preventive approach to fires and basically really trying to stop fires on peatland that are the ones that really result in the heavy haze and the health problems that are associated with it.
Here's the thing, though, Luca. The agriculture sector is obviously so important to Indonesia's economy, and it's not like it can just, pivot away and diversify into something else. But on the other hand, it clearly does need to diversify somewhat so that when there is a hit to the economy like this, there's something to fall back on.
Well, look, there are ways to continue with agricultural development, like Indonesia is doing, and actually controlling the fires. The fires are started in a range of environments and by a range of people, basically. So what needs to happen is that there is a shift from burning to land clearing with other methods. I mean, so it doesn't mean they need to stop agricultural production. What it means that all the plantations should be really using mechanical ways of clearing land and not using fire at all, particularly in peatland. That should not happen. The problem that the government is faced with in Indonesia is how to manage fires that are started by the smallholders, the people who have few hectares of land. I mean, currently there is a regulation that allows smallholders to burn up to 2 hectares for traditional, basically for the agriculture. The government is currently talking about banning that practice as well. But the big question there is how are these smallholders then going to survive, because that's part of their cropping practices. They don't have the mechanical alternative that the large companies have.
Okay, just a final thought, if you wouldn't mind, here on the regional impact, because you almost feel sorry for Indonesia's neighbours at the moment. Their people and their economies are really suffering as well, and it is through no fault of their own.
Well, you see, that's part of the reason, I think, why the Indonesian government now is becoming even more serious than in the past, because basically this fire event, this haze event, has been not only an environmental and social sort of catastrophic event, but I think has also been an international relation catastrophe, if you want, because there are a significant economic and social health effect on other countries in the region, and it's really beyond that as well, because we are about to go to the annual climate change discussions in December, and Indonesia is going there with a carbon emission budget which is horrific. So I think the government is really taking stock of the international relation problems they're faced if they don't really control the problem.
Luca Tacconi, a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for your time.
Thanks to you. Thanks for inviting me.
And that's our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page with individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet me at KamalAJE, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you're on Twitter, or just drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.